HistoryNet and Mr. Brass are interviewing Weedy Jackson. Tell us about yourself, sir.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
All right. Hi, I'm Jackson. Nice to meet everyone.
You too. How was your day?
Oh, it's been all right. Away from home currently, which is why I'm not. I don't have my camera on. Plus, I left my good mic at home, so having to make do with all the silly technology, these newfangled devices.
Wait, you got a mic?
Regardless, I have my my good mic. My Blue Yeti is at home. I didn't bring it with me.
I always hear good stuff about that. That and Snowball. Does anyone like? I believe they say Snowball is like the cheaper one, but the Yeti's the better quality one. I'm not sure.
You get what you pay for, I suppose.
Fair enough. So yeah.
Tell the dear audience all about yourself and what you do.
Eat, breathe, beat my heart. Well, I am a student at LSU currently. Well, I was at LSU Baton Rouge now, but LSU Shreveport, which is my home. So come visit me if you're nearby. I have a YouTube channel, which is just my name, where I primarily talk about biology, paleontology, and geology, and also young Earth creationism, where we beat the crap out of it, because that's always doesn't love being up on young Earth creationism. And so I do interviews with people. A subject, or if they're the honest who thinks they have some argument. Do it.
I remember you did an interview with Michael Jones from Inspiring Philosophy. That thing went pretty good.
Oh yes, I think that was a very good conversation. I enjoyed it immensely. Had a good time on that one.
Because I think it was one of the few times that you actually have like a Christian and you have a Christian and a non-believer talking about evolution, and it's not about whether or not it actually happened.
Right. Yeah. Our conversation was more on the so I suppose the mode of evolution in a sense, or some modes of evolution. He leans more towards the structuralist interpretation, which I'd never come across before I saw his video, which is an interesting video. And so I made one. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I believe, I think I heard from him. I'm sure I get confirmation from you yourself. I believe you lean more towards the functionalist perspective.
In a sense, yes. The way that I was approaching it is, in the technical literature, no one really refers to either to functionalism or structuralism. This is an exceptionally niche area, and so I'd never heard of structuralism before. I talked to PZ about it, who is a cell biologist. He has, because he was taught about structuralism when he was in college and whatnot, so he's read about it. But it was entirely new to me, and I'm intrigued by it. Obviously, it has some practical application.
What led you to your passion for evolution studies?
I think it has something to do with its sponsorship with Wheaties.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yep.
I'm sorry. Yeah, it's the Turing patterns. The stripes and spots on animals are not controlled genetically. They are controlled, or they occur via how tissues and cells interact with each other. And so that's so there's one practical application of structuralism. And so we talked about that among other things, and it was a very good talk. And then, of course, I had him on later for a video where we talked about abiogenesis. So,
well, yeah, I remember what was funny about that is that I actually remember I tagged you on Twitter about that because Atheist Republic did the same exact thing that Young Earth Creationists did, and they confused abiogenesis and evolution as if they're the same thing.
yeah, that's like a young Earth creationist mishap. They're always
They act like
Try the two.
They act like young Earth creationists.
I just thought it was hilarious because it's one of the
yeah. I mean,
I just thought it was hilarious because that's one of like the few times I've ever seen like an atheist like actually just like make that. I think atheists hang out with young Earth creationists so much that it's starting to rub off on them.
it has an unusual blowback effect.
What led to your
yeah,
passion for evolution studies?
Well, I suppose much like Lady Gaga, I was born this way. I've never not been interested in zoology and paleontology. I'm interested in those, and so they've kind of matured as I've grown. When I was a kid, everyone was either a space kid or a dinosaur kid, and I was a dinosaur kid. So.
Yeah, I was both growing up.
Oh, there you go.
I love dinosaurs.
Yeah, I was. Oh, sorry.
I mean, I always loved dinosaurs because I like the Land Before Time.
Oh, that used to be my shit.
Yeah,
I love dinosaurs.
That was one of my favorite things growing up. I remember still like remember Ducky was one of my favorite characters, and then I realized a sad story about that incident.
And Spike, who never talked.
Yeah, because they had like they're not. Stegosaurus had very tiny brains. So.
Yeah, I would always look forward to the sharp tooth coming in.
Yeah, that was kind of scary as a kid, this dreaded carnivore who terrorizes everybody else.
Well, I mean, what's funny about it is that as much as like we like it, we always have to realize there's story elements to it, because if you're actually going to be deadly literal on the science, like most of the animals in the Land Before Time, they didn't live together.
Right. Yeah, they Anatosaurus, which is Ducky, didn't live at the same time as Stegosaurus. In fact, the Stegosaurs as a clade were long extinct by the time the Hadrosaurs first evolved. So.
Once you think of it as time compression before the Land Before Time, you can have more fun with it.
Sure. Yeah, but so yeah, I was a dinosaur kid, and I love dinosaurs. And as I grew older, I focused more or less on just like the individual dinosaurs and more on how they interacted with each other ecologically, where they lived in relation to each other in time, and so as time has gone on, I've read more and more and more literature on the evolutionary history of life, and the more I read about evolution, the more fascinated with it I am. Just this morning, I was reading about the earliest eukaryote fossils, which is fascinating.
Tweeting about.
Speaking of dinosaurs, though, Jurassic Park's another major factor into that.
Yep, that was Jurassic Park 1 was great.
Yeah, and only two of those two species in the entire movie were from the Jurassic period.
Yeah, they had the Brachiosaurus and
those dinosaurs that do not spit poison.
Oh yeah, the Dilophosaurus. Yeah, there was it No, it wasn't Dilophosaurus. There was one dinosaur. I can't remember which one it was, but there was a duet.
It started with a D, I think.
Yeah, Dilophosaurus.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was Dilophosaurus. There was a dinosaur where someone tried making a case that it was venomous because it had some, like two of its teeth were unusually larger than the rest. I don't think that ever really panned out, but
And of course, the T-Rex is always the star.
of
I mean, yeah.
course, yeah.
I mean, it's the mother effing T-Rex. I mean,
Right.
what's funny about like is I remember in the newer Jurassic Park movies, they actually they try to explain away the fact that why some of them don't look like chickens and like they just look like lizards.
Well,
They
they
say that
have
they're
the frog genome.
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. We think the T-Rex in real life probably looked like a giant roadrunner from hell.
Yeah, it's if it did have feathers, it seems the skin impressions on the underside show that it was not the underside wasn't feathered. Um, it's possible though that it was feathered on the back. Just it had feathers just running along the back. And an interesting prospect is whether or not because there were imprints of its feet, or of I guess it was like the skin on part of its leg near the foot. And what is interesting, I think, is whether or not the scales by its feet were in fact modified feathers, like the scales on vulture feet, which are actually modified feathers. So, they're secondarily modified feathers. So I think that'd be really interesting. Uh, but at this time, we can't really make that call on it. So,
And interestingly enough, the flying dinosaurs were more reptilian than land dinosaurs, which
I'm
had
not sure what you mean.
they're flying reptiles. Considered they're more reptile than bird.
Oh, you mean like the pterosaurs?
Yeah,
Yeah, they well, even them it seems research has shown that they had little fibrous uh filaments that adorn their bodies. So the the ancestor of the feather might date as far back as like the earliest archosaurs. Interestingly enough.
Oh, but I mean, obviously people were around with them and obviously rode their backs like a horse.
and use a brontosaurus for cranes,
Exactly, exactly.
and
And they were and
use pterodactyls as aircrafts.
oh yeah, and they were all vegans.
Yeah,
And
it's, we joke, but at the same time, we know there are people out there who think this is history.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I said, there's people out there that watch the Flintstones and think it's a documentary.
Yeah, I think it is Bill Ludlow who calls them, was it Flintstone truthers or something?
Flintstones archaeology.
Flintstones archaeology. Yeah, that was, yeah, I think that's Bill who calls them that. Which is just hilarious. It's a great name.
Well,
Flintstone.
it comes from Lewis Black, a comedian that did something like that. Like that's where I get the joke from because basically said there are people out like he in one stand up he said there are people out there that they watch the Flintstones and they think it's a documentary. I shit you not. That's what he legit says.
There's also people
Yeah.
who think the world's flat and that Australia is a made-up country and that Jesus never walked the earth.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
Homeopaths and moon hoaxers or moon
Oh
landing
yeah, moon
hoaxers and
hoaxers are
9/11
another one.
truthers, and if
I,
there's an idea, someone's opposing it somewhere.
Moon hoaxers are
yeah,
pretty loud now that we've reached the anniversary of the moon landing, which was directed by Stanley Kubrick.
He could only be so lucky.
well, I mean, what's funny is about that is like I always joke about that. Like, if Stanley Kubrick really did try to do like they would have never gotten done if they would have gotten Stanley Kubrick because he was OCD as hell.
He was a perfectionist.
Yeah, if they would have hired him to fake the moon landing, it would have never gotten done.
We'd at least have better shots,
Yeah, and it would have looked something like 2001: A Space Odyssey instead of that grainy footage that we have.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I remember it was so funny. It's like, there's this one flat earther. He calls himself like, he's more of a flat earth agnostic nowadays, which, yeah,
That's so dumb. That's like
yeah.
I talked to someone just yesterday who said he was agnostic on whether evolution happens, but every time I tried giving him evidence, he said, "Well, I'll read it later." Like
Oh,
you're not
yeah, I know.
agnostic.
I know
That's
you're
not
talking about that.
agnosticism.
Does he end up reading it later?
I have no idea.
No.
I mean, that was only yesterday, so I doubt he will though.
I know who you're talking about. I think he has a cross on his profile thing.
Oh yeah, yes. His name is different. It used to be something else.
Yeah.
Oh,
Uh,
frick, I can't remember his old name, but yeah, it was a yeah, but yeah, it's like if you say you're agnostic on something, then you refuse to look at evidence. You're not agnostic. You've made up your mind.
Like Jesus agnostics.
Yeah.
I mean, it's completely funny about that stuff. So I mean, since you obviously go after young Earth creationists and the folk like that, were you ever one of them?
Uh, no, not to my recollection. I was a Christian at one point, but never a young Earth creationist. It was never uh, mandated in my household. Uh,
Thank
so
God.
no. Yeah, I never, had to be like, oh, I've been lied to and all that. No, that never happened to me, fortunately.
Yeah.
No.
You said you came across young Earth creationists fairly recently.
In a sense, the very first young Earth creationist, the first time I heard the word creationist was in 2014. Believe it or not.
Wow.
Yeah, seriously, it was the Bill Nye Ken Ham debate. That was the first time I'd ever heard that word, and I've watched it like 3 times since then, and I'm fully convinced Ken Ham is just the worst debater of all time.
He's one of them.
I mean, he could have like scored a few points, but he's just so bad a debater. He did not.
Like nothing you can ever say will convince me that this is true.
I mean, come on, come on.
There's no point in debating that.
No.
Well, I mean, think on the bright side, he was being honest there, unlike the entire rest of the debate.
I mean, that's fair. He is telling you you're never going to convince him otherwise. But I mean, even still, it's like, that's one of those things. Like, you just don't say that during a debate because people are going to hear that and go, "Whoops."
And then he builds it on this false dichotomy. Like you have to believe the Bible is 100% literally true, or none of it's true. And if there is a God, or if there's evolution.
I mean,
Right.
he actually say something like that. Like after the debate, he said it's not a salvation issue. He says it's an authority issue.
It's neither.
Well, no, that's what he says. Like, he says that you can be saved and not be a young Earth creationist, but he ultimately believes that if you don't believe that the Earth is 6,000 years old, you have no basis in your interpretation, and you're just going off of science, the corrupt scientist.
As one who's professionalized in evolution studies, tell us what that experience has been like for you ever since.
Ever since coming across creationism?
Yeah.
Well, frustrating, I guess. I wish I'd never known that it exists. I wouldn't spend so much time banging my head against a wall. But I guess it's been interesting in one sense because I have to look into my own side more, to counter the claims of creationists. If a creationist puts a claim forth that's like, oh, all populations are degrading over time, they're going to achieve genetic entropy, well, I have to look into this and see, okay, what are population geneticists actually saying about organisms? And it's the exact opposite, things like that. So as Tony Reed says, it's how creationism taught me real science.
I mean, what's funny is like Well, I mean, you could say we've degraded in some sense if you've seen our politics.
And culture.
But
Yeah.
I don't think that's what they were going for when they said that.
Well, they're referring to genetic degradation over time, which is one of Standing for Truth's favorite little lines.
Standing.
I'm sorry, I mentioned his name. My bad. I'll do 5 Hail Marys and, but
I remember
yeah.
it's funny that he legitimately made one of the most stupid he actually made a response video to Michael Jones from Inspiring Philosophy, and he made the most stupidest argument you could possibly make. He said Michael Jones relies so much on other ancient Near East writings to confirm the Bible. I'm like, so wait, what I'm seriously saying is that he's looking to other documents to see if they have some influence on this document that was around the same time.
Oh yeah, IP. Yeah, he emailed me about that because we were laughing about how we dealt with standing stupidity, and he messaged me that, and I was like, oh my god.
I know, it was so funny because like he also made this stupid argument. He said, well, we have the English translation, so how dare you actually use a language that like go back to the original language that was like
That's
yeah, like, so wait, you're telling me that if like someone writes you something in Spanish and they get it translated, you're not going to want to go back and see if something was lost in translation?
that's like that governor from Texas who said, if English is good enough for Jesus Christ, it's good enough for me.
Why is he in office? Why?
Ah, I think that was a long time ago when she said that, but it's such a great line. Good Lord. It's hard to find gems purer than that.
I mean, what's funny is like I seriously do believe that if young Earth creationists, instead of actually doing what they're currently doing, if they just took their work on stage, like to be comedians, they wouldn't even have to change anything. They could just repeat their act now, and they could probably make good money off of it.
Especially
They
Hogan.
probably could. Yeah. The sad thing about young Earth creationism is if you compare what they put out, any publication they put out against a scientific work in the same field, the difference is night and day. Creationists they don't care. They really don't care to do like research or to fact check their own arguments. Um, there are very few citations when you look through their work, as opposed to when you look at research in the same field by, a regular scholar. There are loads of citations. There are just insane amounts of evidence, and there's all sorts of fact checking and back and forth among researchers. You don't get that in the creationist fields. And RJ and I are actually looking at that currently in the book that we're writing, which is titled "The Rocks Were There." We're doing a full court press analysis of all 4 of the Answers in Genesis, the New Answers books. So,
Oh yeah, how is that going, by the way?
it's over halfway done now. So we're thinking like 14 chapters, and so yeah, so it's over halfway done. I'm very excited. I think we're both very excited because we're grilling them on a level that their books have not been grilled. So
You gotta publish it, have it, try to get it for peer review.
yeah, we actually have a few different researchers who have read over some of our stuff to make sure we have our facts right in certain areas.
And you mentioned the introductory or first chapter or whatever is stressing dispelling the false dichotomy between higher power and evolution.
Yes, in our first chapter, we do a couple of things. We talk about like you said, the false dichotomy between you can, if you if you accept evolution, you have to be an atheist. It's like, no, that's obviously very wrong. We point to numerous examples: Robert Bacher, Mary Schweitzer, Francis Collins. The list is endless.
Sygart.
Sygart, yeah, he's another one. I like Sygart.
Yeah.
And so,
Stop the guy.
yeah. So there's there's that. We talk about the alleged historical versus observational science. That little canard that creationists like to throw around.
I mean, just remember, like, you can't really trust, like, if a tree falls down in the forest, you can't, since you weren't there to observe the tree fall down, you can't really make nothing of it.
Exactly. It means nothing. It is not even a data point. We can't know anything about it based on our experiences.
What are some of the most interesting things you can tell us about your field?
About the field?
Yeah, your field, evolution,
Well,
biology.
we're related to pine trees and elephants. That's pretty neat.
Yeah, totally.
I suppose when I the crazy thing about evolution is about life in general is I think people don't grasp the scope of it. We think about taxa in space as though they're just isolated little data points. Like we talked about T-Rex earlier. It's like, well, T-Rex lived 65 million years ago, but it lived in an environment where there were certain types of trees, certain types of grasses. There were other dinosaurs in that area. T-Rex also had a specific gut flora. And there are all these different sorts of interactions going on at any one time, and you have to magnify that, not, for that one slice of time, but across the entire world, and then realize that you have to magnify that across billions of years.
Mm.
And so when you put all of that into perspective, seeing how evolution can produce the biodiversity that we have today becomes a pretty simple task.
What do you make of the theory that it was a comet or a meteor that wiped out the dinosaurs instead of them just degrading over time and slowly becoming birds?
Well, both happened. The first birds appear in the late Jurassic, like 100 it was like 150 million years ago or so, something like that. 160 million years ago. You get the first birds were are split close to the dromaeosaurs, the group containing like Deinonychus, Velociraptor. They're very close to the birds, so there was a whole radiation of theropod dinosaurs around the end of the Jurassic, probably due to their coevolutionary relationship with the first flowering plants. As for, and then of course birds were the only dinosaurs to survive the KT extinction event. But as for the meteoric impact hypothesis, whatever, for a long time it was a pretty plausible, or it has been pretty plausible, given like the Chicxulub impact crater in the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, which is dated to the KT boundary, and there's an iridium layer across the KT boundary. But then just this year, just a few months ago, there was a site discovered in the United States called the Tanis site. Now, the Tanis site, which is fascinating because it is the result, it is a snapshot of a few hours after the meteor hit the Earth.
Interesting.
So basically, what you have is the meteor hits the Yucatan Peninsula and is basically an explosion. It hurls rock into the air. When meteors do this, they rain down these little glass spheres, which are called tektites. And so it's like basically molten glass that solidifies as it falls back to Earth. And so the tektites from this impact hit or fell into the ocean, and they suffocated these fish. And so these fish are found, and so that's what's found at the Tanis sites. All these fish with the tektites in their gills. It's just amazing. This is, probably going to be one of the most important fossil discoveries of the decade. So
That is really interesting. Like, figured that meteor would be followed by other mini meteors, like you see in that scene in Dinosaur.
well, it does because it smashes and the rock is basically heaved back up and then comes back down, or some rock is. That's crazy.
Yeah. It's actually like kind of amazing when you think about how you would expect more meteors to be hitting us, but because of the way we're sort of positioned with the other planets, we don't get it as much as you would think. I'm like, when you know,
I think that's
it's because of Jupiter, I believe, it takes most of the
Yeah.
damage.
right. It's got a bigger gravitational pull, and so it takes the meteors from. Yeah, I think I've heard that.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. I actually remember what's funny is like, I remember one time I was suggesting it to you, is like, if you could ever get a debate with anyone on there, I think a funny one would be with you to get with Danny Faulkner from Answers in Genesis. Because, I mean, he actually has a PhD.
Oh yeah, him and Jason Lyle. I think Faulkner is an astronomer and Lyle is a physicist.
Well, I mean, you already debated a PhD. You debated Ken Hovind.
Oh, barf.
Diploma Milhoven.
Diploma Milhoven. Yeah, Oh yeah, I was talking to Standing on Twitter just the other day, and um, someone made a comment about not having a degree, and they were talking about the debate that Godless Engineer had with Hovind, and Standing said, "Oh yes, Godless Engineer doesn't have a doctorate," and I said, "No, the person was referring to Hovind. He has no doctorate, no master's, and I doubt he has a bachelor's. He's a fraud."
What was your opinion on that debate?
Uh, you have to be familiar with Hovind's shtick. You know,
That's a given.
I think John did all repeating the same stuff for decades. You have to have a handle on the stuff that he's going to spout. If you want to pull up a certain line of evidence, be ready for whatever his, preconceived counter is. And so, in my debate with him, whether or not the global flood happened, I only used points of evidence that I knew he couldn't read because there was no response to them in creationist literature. I did the same thing to Standing for Truth, and it was fun to watch him fail.
Like in his debate with Inspiring Philosophy.
Me, I'm a little sadistic.
Yeah, in his debate with Inspiring Philosophy, there's very little Hovind said that he hasn't already said in his debate with Joel Edmund Anderson.
I remember what was funny.
Yeah, the thing about Hovind is, sorry.
Oh, I remember it was funny with Aaron Ra with his little debates or whatever with Aaron Ra. Now it's so funny, it's like, because for some reason Ken Hovind does not want to call Aaron Ra and wants to call him everything else but that, and now Aaron is just calling him by his prison name.
Yeah, inmate 645 2017. Yeah. Yeah, it's just disrespect. That's all it is. Hovind could have been the adult, just called R by his name, but he didn't because he's just a child. He's a
he hasn't wanted to call him
child, but
he hasn't wanted anybody calling him by his name, L. Arn Nelson.
Yeah. But the funny thing about what was it? The thing about Hovind is he wants everyone to call him Dr. Hovind. But then someone called him on. I think it was Aaron. I think Aaron.
I think it may have been Steve. I believe Steve McRae actually talked to get bit a lot, and he actually got Hovind to admit that he couldn't actually teach anyone with his degrees that he has.
But while we're on this topic,
might as well call him Captain Hovind.
While we're on this topic, tell us about your involvement in the atheist community and your sentiments about new atheists / anti-theists.
I suppose my involvement in the atheist community isn't really all that great. I flirted with the idea of doing atheist videos on my channel when I first started, but I really got away from that, and I pretty much do entirely evolution or anti-creationism videos. When I first became an atheist, which was 10, 11, I was the only atheist I knew, and for a few years I was the only atheist I knew, and so my only outlet for atheism was really YouTube videos where I saw, like we were talking about earlier, Dark Matter and TJ Kirk and Declan Glenn and the Atheist Experience and all these other guys. And I would watch all those.
Dusty, Armored Skeptic, Thunderfoot.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I would watch all those guys, and The Bible Reloaded, that's another one. But as time went on, I kind of became less concerned with the sort of, arguing with people about whether or not there is a God. I really don't even do that anymore. I have no problem with anyone who does believe in a God or, wants to believe. If they derive comfort and joy from that, hey, that's their prerogative. And that's kind of been my opinion on that for a few years now. As I said, before we went live, I guess I'm just more comfortable kind of with myself now. And so really being all about atheism isn't so much what I do anymore. As for new atheists, I suppose, I guess my only advice would be don't take anyone's word for anything. If it sounds very reasonable, well, check it out anyways. Don't just take someone's word for it. I guess that'd be my advice to them. But
anyway. Your opinions about those rabid types who just can't live and let live.
Yeah, I mean, of course I see the. I understand people want to talk about whether or not there is a God, and if they want to do that, then fine. But you're right. At the same time, it's kind of if someone wants to believe or not to believe, then other people don't have to shove their beliefs down that person's throat. They can live and let live, as you say. And so that's kind of, and so with regard to the question of whether or not there is a God, that's kind of how I take that approach now. I don't argue with people about that because I really don't care. I mean, I have no problem being identified as an atheist. I am, but I don't care that much anymore. It's less a part of my character overall, I think.
Yeah, you're not alone in that. Apparently, you also have no love for mythicism either, the young earth creationism of atheism. Like, I think you said a while back that you used to be one before seeing the light.
Yeah, that was really in high school. I was kind of enthralled with some of the Richard Carrier arguments, and then I heard the rebuttal, and then I went, oops.
Rebuttals by Tim O'Neill and Bart Ehrman in them.
Yeah, and so I was kind of like, well, it didn't really, for a while I was like, oh, well, it didn't really matter to me, and it's like, well, the vast majority of the historical community says that Jesus was a person, so Jesus was a person, and well, in the same way that, like, I don't have to study, a bunch of equations in physics to know what the speed of light is. I'll take their word for it. That's if they believe there's good reason to, and it's the entire community, then there's clearly good reason for it.
I mean, it's sort of like with Richard Carrier arguments. You only have to remember 3 words: cosmic sperm bank. Like, you don't need to remember any. Like, you could just, like, you know, if I got into a debate with Richard Carrier, I would just say those 3 words and just walk out. You don't, like, after that, after you say that, you don't really need to say much else.
A cosmic sperm angel from outer space who was crucified by demons and then buried underneath the surface of the moon, where people eat, drink, and do all other stuff that people do on Earth, that there might as well not be a distinction.
Right.
I always find it funny, as I said, if Richard Carrier if he took all of his mythicist work and just translated that over into comic books, he could make a killing.
I mean, probably, yeah. Yeah, that's, yeah.
There's also a psychological appeal to it, like recovering fundagelicals in particular. They would go for that because they feel like they've been lied to all their lives about God, and like, well, gee, what else have we been lied to?
Sure. You're right. You're right. There is that aspect to it. What's funny is, well, for me personally, when I came across mythicism, I'd been an atheist for a number of years, and so I was just kind of like, whoa, I've never heard of this before. But
yeah, history's more important than ideology.
I mean, it's just about scholarship, to be quite frank.
Yeah.
I mean, I would agree with you in that for a lot of people, probably is the pendulum swing to the complete opposite side. But I really don't think. I think you can make, in my opinion, as long as I've been atheist, I've always kind of been of the opinion that you don't have to argue that any religious figure was non-existent to make a case for atheism. You don't have to argue Muhammad wasn't a real person, or Jesus, or whomever, Joseph Smith, to show the flaws in this argumentation. I've just never thought that was a necessity, and I think it's something that, as a community, the atheist community kind of needs to, or at least those of whom are mythicists,
the tribal ones. The tribal ones feel the need to do a scorched earth policy and beat Christianity to the ground, no matter what.
Sure, and yeah, it's not a necessary argument, and I think it further complicates and further kind of alienates our. If you're coming to a theist and you're presenting atheism and you say, yes, yes, okay, we disagree on whether or not God exists, but we also disagree on whether or not every other character that you're familiar with exists. It's like, do we need to add all these extra steps?
Like we have as much, considering the circumstances, we have as much evidence as we would expect to find for a first-century Jewish preacher in the ghetto of the Roman Empire, Messiah or no Messiah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I don't know. I think it just adds unnecessary steps and further kind of divides the groups.
Sadly enough, we know Joseph Smith existed. I really wish we didn't, but does. I would love to just find out it was just all one big just conspiracy theory. But I sadly just can't have that much hope.
Yeah, I think there were much better records by the time he was around.
Like, Mormonism's not really a religion so much as a mainstream cult.
Well, I mean, you have to remember. I mean, like they always say, religions are just old and bigger cults.
Yeah, it's gained like a generational following, right? But it's just not a necessary argument. I don't think we have to really broach that argument to make our own case. So that's just my piece on it.
Yeah, I mean, to be like, I always found this funny is like, I mean, it's not like there's not literature out there for atheists to use that's actually scholarly, that, even theists will admit is good, like other scholars will admit it. Like, I always just found it funny, this is like in philosophy, you'll have philosophers like J.L. Stoltenberg, Thomas Nagel, you'll have like all these like Paul Draper, you have a bunch of these atheistic philosophers, and they've spent like literally decades poring over arguments to make the position, like make atheism an intellectual position. So I mean, I just said the information is available. You could, like, the community could be actually taking it to theists a lot more.
Yeah.
So that's what I always. I mean, it's sort of like, you know, I mean, I always just like it's a waste of opportunity. Like the information is there, like, and it's not like so complicated where you'd have to have a PhD to understand it. Like, you could pick it up and like you could get the arguments.
Yeah, I'm kind of I'm not a philosophy person. I really do appreciate philosophy, and I appreciate all the people out there who can understand philosophy, but I'm really not a philosophically minded person.
I mean, that's fair. I'm not saying like everyone has to be. I'm just saying, like, if atheists really,
Well, sure,
like, if they really
sure.
wanted to make the intellectual, like, if they really wanted to butt heads with, like, because that's a big thing that Christian apologists generally do, is they use philosophy. And like, if atheists really wanted to do a number, I would think that the smartest and logical thing to do would be to know the philosophical literature for atheism, and then just completely butt heads with them on that point. Because
Sure.
if you can, because if you, yeah. Oh, like I'm just saying,
I agree with you.
You know, I always found it funny because, like, I remember Armored Skeptic sort of made the funny, like, I know a lot of atheists do this. They say that while they're atheists, they feel like they make better Christians than actual Christians. Which I can believe that in certain cases. I generally can believe that. But, I mean, yeah.
From my perspective, from the area that I study, I think really just kind of looking at religions from a historical and psychological and sociology of religion, looking at religions from those kind of perspectives is like, well, they seem to have elements of like mythic tales, and we can have evolved over time, and we can kind of see the origin in some cases of stories. I mean, for me, because I'm not a philosophically minded person, I just look at it from that perspective, and I'm kind of like, okay, yeah, it seems that these are, if not intentionally made, which I don't think any of them were intentionally made, or at least not any of the ancient ones, then they were amalgamated from a number of different sources, right?
Yeah,
it seems fairly reasonable to me. So,
yeah, religious beliefs evolve.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, we can even tell that in modern time that they do. But yeah, I actually remember. I don't know if it was a recent or before. I remember you stressed like how long it takes for like changes to happen in evolution, like, you know, over millions of years. Like for how like we adapt to drinking milk or something. I know probably.
Yeah, drinking milk was.
I know I'm probably
tens of thousands of years. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I remember you said that it can take like a long time for certain changes to happen.
Well, sure. I mean, religion goes back. Well, religion alone, like back, tens of thousands of years at
50,000 years.
Who knows what the pronoun is?
Yeah, 50,000 years when we gained our when man gained all the abilities that make us definitively human. You know, art, culture,
more
abstract, individuality.
You know, more abstract.
Well, that's when we see it crop up in the fossil record, certainly.
Yeah, which makes sense when you think about it. Like, if there was going to be a time that religion would come up, it would probably be around the same time we would notice abstract thinking coming about.
Sure, yeah, and there's, I just commented on you mentioned like evolutionary psychology in a post on Twitter. That is one place.
Yeah, evolutionary psychology is the new phrenology.
Yeah, evolutionary psychologists would like to believe that we definitely know what religion or how religion arose. It's like, no, we really don't. It's an interesting prospect, but we don't know. I mean, certainly there are selective pressures that could cause some forms of religiosity to come about, but you can't really test that directly because there are no human ancestors still walking around. So.
It's true. Well, I mean, we always have to define proof because there is generally people don't understand the difference between proof and evidence.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Which can be annoying in certain circumstances when people don't understand that difference. Is like 2 + 2 = 4 is a proof. Like, evidence is what you would bring into a courtroom to say this person is probably guilty of killing this guy.
Did you use a courtroom analogy? Shame on you.
I mean, differently. Well, now I get what you mean. Damn me! I now have to have a Hail Mary myself.
You both got to do Hail Marys.
We both have to do them now. Yeah.
Yeah. In case anyone may not know, this is like I had to cool off a bit, like a couple hours ago. Like actually, it was a little while ago. I had to cool down because I had gotten into a big fight, like on Facebook, because one guy kept asserting burden of proof, and like he brought up a court analogy and stuff like that. I'm like, in a one-on-one conversation is not analogous to a courtroom.
Using another courtroom analogy, with new atheists / anti-theists and the God question, it's always guilty until proven innocent.
I mean, it's not even that really. It's like they don't get the thing is like if this was truly, if we wanted to really go all out with the court analogy, what we would have is a third-party neutral party, like an agnostic or someone, who could just say, judge who has the burden of proof in the particular debate, and we wouldn't be trying to convince each other what we try to do in like a one-on-one conversation. We'd be trying to convince the agnostic, but that doesn't really happen. So I mean, it's just a stupid analogy with that in that terms. And like I always just make it like this: is that no one has a burden of proof when there's no institutional rules in play. Like there's no one to set the rules of condition. Like unless you want to say you have a burden of proof to yourself to justify your own position, that's a different matter. I can imagine, but like. I mean, I make another condition like for myself is that if someone wants to convince you of something, then they have a burden to like. If someone wants to go up to you and they want to convince you of something, irregardless of what it particularly is, the person that's trying to convince you does have a burden because they are imposing themselves on you. That's like a different thing. I always make those general rules. Like, if I go up to an atheist and I say, like, if I just meet an atheist on the street and I just say God exists to him and like, I'm imposing it on him, then I do feel like I have I have to somehow justify my position because I'm imposing it. But if when I say it goes the opposite way around too.
Well, sure, I would say both.
Yeah, like. I would say it's who's trying to convince them.
Say both sides have to
give justifications.
Exactly, right.
I mean, well, here's what's funny that people don't get.
Right.
The burden of proof doesn't actually mean you prove anything. The burden of proof just means that you have to give a justification for why you believe something to be the case. Like proof is a whole matter in of itself. You can have justification for something and it not be good justification. We can see young Earth creationists with that all the time.
Yeah.
They have plenty of justification, just none of it's good.
Right.
But I think actually there is one question. what's like in your entire time of debating with young Earth creationists, have you ever found an argument that they've used to be particularly difficult?
Um, time I've ever bumped into a difficult creationist is when it's not across yet. Throw out, and they're like, "Aha! Look at this argument." And I have to go, "Okay, well, give me time to go research that." And it's rather complicated. Of course, they're not reading any of the complicated stuff, but that's really complicated creationist argument. Salvador came on my, and he kept bringing up like, "Oh, look at this little cell, or the subcellular structure that does this. Oh, nice. Must have been intelligently designed." Fortunately, I had PZ Myers in the chat, and he was like, "Actually, it's not for this reason." And so, but that's really the only see difficult creationist arguments. I don't feel that there are any that are just like knocked down good arguments against evolution from creationists. I've never encountered any.
Like, if there's any favorite young Earth creationist argument that any of us might have, mine would be, so beauty isn't a purely evolutionary advantage. It's a purely evolutionary advantage for us to perceive beauty and to be beautiful, right? But if we had 200,000 years of doing this, why are there still so many ugly people?
That's just quite something. Why are there ugly people?
That is actually like
Have a verse. Oh man.
Yeah, mine. I always made this funny one. I mean, if the Earth is so, oh yeah, this was the one I actually made with Shannon Q one time. I said, I mean, if the Earth is billions of years old, then why is it only 2019?
Checkmate ate the tits.
Checkmate.
Yeah,
And that one guy that appeared on the. Do what? And silence.
I actually think we've been past the hour mark.
It's a different.
Huh?
Uh-oh. Did I cut out?
Yeah, you're kind of fading away there.
Oh, whoops. I always become a.
Can't hear you.
Colloquial conversation. I become. Uh-oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah. It just keeps going in and out. I mean,
can you hear me?
I didn't think we. Yeah.
Yeah. While you're fixing that, we'll read from the live chat for a while.
Yeah, we'll get from the live chat because I think we have been going for about an hour and 20 minutes.
Bill Ludlow stopped by earlier and said, "Hey guys, wish I could watch now, but getting ready for work. I'll watch tomorrow." Hey, Bill. Cameron Gilchrist says evolutionary theory is perfectly compatible with a Christian worldview.
Depends on which Christian worldview you're adopting from. If you're adopting from creationism, then no.
No, he said Christian worldview, but young Earth creationists and anti-theists are flip sides of the same coin. Sure.
To some degree, I can agree with that. Although, in my experience with both sides, I can say that young Earth creationists are probably the more stupid ones.
Yeah.
All right, so that's one.
Utopia Buster says, without a reasonable explanation for abiogenesis, naturalistic evolution is one big donut hole.
Nope.
Got anything to add?
That's a big negative.
Uh, he also says naturalists have already given up on a pure Darwinian model, and many evolutionists are now arguing for a third way or extended synthesis, since natural selection is a failed process.
Well, I mean, considering that there haven't been any Darwinists since the late 1800s, I'm inclined to agree.
mean, I mean, like being called a Darwinist, like is like being called a Newtonianist. Like no,
You're an Aristotelian, don't you know that?
yeah.
It's like, what the heck?
I know it's like we don't call people that believe like in Newtonian physics Newtonians. We just call them correct.
Yeah, and just I think that person was very confused about what they were attempting to convey. Natural selection hasn't failed. The whole point of the extended synthesis is that it's in addition to the mechanisms of evolution we already have. None of the ones we already knew have failed. We're just adding more. It's like what? I don't understand what. I think that person is a little bit confused.
I don't know either. Cameron Gilchrist says, yep, or evolution, a theory in crisis, will bring up some good results.
Oh boy, Michael Denton's book. Wow, ooh, boy, bringing out the heavy hitters with that one. I say in sarcasm.
Utopia Buster says, anti-theists are neo-Darwinists, but I call them evolutionary naturalists.
I mean, some maybe, but like I don't know, like what would even be like the neo-Darwinism? I know I've heard that term before. Isn't that just functionalism?
Well, Neo-Darwinism was formed from the synthesis of Mendelian inheritance with the Darwinian mechanisms. That was in the 1930s, 40s. So once researchers basically rediscovered Mendel's work and figured out kind of how genetics works, in part, combine those with natural and sexual selection, and that's what gave them the Neo-Darwinian synthesis, and then more mechanisms were added thereafter, of course.
Utopia Buster also says there is absolutely no evidence for speculation or macroevolution, pure speculation. I would disagree, but
That is this. So this person's a creationist, I assume.
well, he's not younger creationist.
Okay, well, okay. So very brief version. Macroevolution. So microevolution is genetic change below the level of species, while macroevolution is genetic change at or above the level of species. It doesn't matter if you quibble with the definition; they've been that way since 1927. So, regardless, per the definition, speciation, which has been observed on numerous occasions, both in the field and in the lab, it has been observed. So, therefore, macroevolution is observed. And then if you want to argue about the fossil record, I can certainly do that. We can look at we can look at different lineages, we can look at gradual lineages, we can look at our own lineage. Macroevolution is definitely a fact. Has been vindicated in pretty much every way. So
Hasn't it been just said that macroevolution is just microevolution over longer periods of time?
you can say that. So yeah, it's I don't
I mean, I don't want to, obviously I'm not a science guy, so I don't want to be, I don't want to go out of my field for, so I let you do that.
well, I mean, you can say, if you give microevolution enough time, you will get new species, which is macroevolution. So, I mean, yeah, you just keep going, just kind of keep moving the process along, and we know that it happens. So,
And he also says there's at least 5 points of valid justification to believe the biblical flood accounts.
at least what?
There's at least 5 points of valid justification to believe the biblical flood account.
Okay, no, that's nonsense. Regardless, oh well.
I mean, there was a flood that inspired the accounts we see all over the Near East in the Bible, but it wasn't global. It didn't really extend outside of the range of Sumer, India, or North Africa.
Well, I mean, if you want to make the case, like, I mean, to the person that lived in the biblical times, their world was flooded because they didn't really have more, like, I mean, if the whole range of your world were, let's say, your trailer park or whatever, and it flooded, you could say your world flooded.
Exactly. Right. Yeah, you know, if the amount of distance you can walk in a day is your whole world, and that gets flooded, that's the whole world. The whole world just got flooded. So, yeah.
He also says, Utopia Buster says, Carrier can't even get a job in academia.
That's fair. I mean, he could get as a librarian, but
he could be a librarian. He'd just keep pointing you to his books. He wouldn't let you get any other books, though.
Well, yeah, and if you tried saying anything bad about his books, he would call you a liar and insane.
And sue you for defamation.
And stroke his own dick about having a PhD in a dubious peer review book, by the way.
Yeah, probably sue you for defamation. So,
well, I mean, whenever someone says Richard Carrier has a PhD, I say so do many of the staff romancers in Genesis.
Most of them do, and they pretty much only get their degree so they can wave it around and go, "Hoo, I'm Georgia Purdom, I'm a geneticist. I'm Andrew Snelling, I'm a geologist." It's like it's purely so they can push their narrative.
Well, I mean, it just means that they spent more time so they could get student debt.
Yeah.
I mean, I imagine it must pay pretty good if they're still there.
It must, yeah.
I do love
must be pretty good.
I do love when he tries to pick a fight with Tim O'Neill because he will push back.
Yeah, it's really funny because they have to, that they are introduced or they have to understand concepts in like evolutionary theory classes. Like Georgia Purdom knows how evolution works. She knows it's true. She refuses to acknowledge it. So same with Andrew Snelling. He knows the Earth is billions of years old. The paycheck is pretty for answers in Genesis. So
Saint Knight says
it has to be the money. It really just does.
Saint Knight says bananas and whales are related. How dare you deny the religion of evolution?
Well, I mean the banana tree is. Bananas are just the fruit, so.
Well, I mean, you have to remember, Jackson. I mean, have you ever just held a banana in your hand? It just looks so clearly designed, like it was made for that purpose of being in your hand.
And you can fit it very comfortably in your anus.
Yeah. It's like, look at all the wonderful places I can fit this. Yeah.
Oh, poor banana.
Yeah.
I mean,
I actually did a video on. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I'm just saying, like, I mean, technically a banana would count as a living being. I think that should count as a form of torture to a living being. Plants are living.
Abuse.
Yeah. All right. Well, so what are you gonna say?
Oh, I did a video just recently on flowering plants. So if he wants to know how we are related to the banana, then she should go check out that video. So
you'll never look at a banana the same. And
they're just your distant cousins. So basically,
your tasty distant cousin.
You're eating your.
So basically, nothing new in Louisiana.
No. Anyway, Utopia Buster says, I am neither young Earth creationist or old Earth creationist. Okay.
He's a middle Earth creationist.
Like
not
Lord of the
too,
Rings.
not too young or too old. It's just right.
It's right. It's Middle Earth creation. He lives in the Lord of the Rings universe.
To be fair, though, that would probably be more rational than young Earth creationism.
Only slightly, but yes.
Only slightly. I am Raku says, what are some good books to get started with knowing all this stuff that's being spoken about?
Well, okay. A couple of good places to start are Your Inner Fish by Neil Shubin. That's a very good book on evolution. Why Evolution is True by Jerry Coyne. That's another pretty good book. The Greatest Show on Earth by Richard Dawkins. One of my favorite books of all time, although it's a very long book, is the Ancestor's Tale, which is by Richard Dawkins. It's an overview, basically, of the evolutionary history of all life. It's a fantastic book. It's ginormous. It's like 700 pages, but it's a fantastic book.
I
You gotta
remember.
remind the audience that Dawkins and Coyne are only to be cited when discussing evolution and biology and not anything else.
Yeah. So
I mean, that's sort of fair. I mean, it's like I didn't go to William Lane Craig for like advice on biology, so I similarly wouldn't go to Richard Dawkins or Jerry Coyne for theology advice.
yeah.
As
yeah.
as Michael Ruse once said, "Reading the God Delusion made me ashamed to be an atheist," and I stand by that.
Yeah, the I do remember. I mean, I remember that I read it, but I don't remember much in it. Whether that's good or bad, I don't know. But
Basically, if you read YouTube atheist comments, you've read it.
I mean, it was a number of years ago when I read it. I just thought, hey, there it is on the shelf. Might as well. And I don't remember anything from it.
I remember one stupid thing though. Whenever they do hit like history, they really butcher it because he cited legitimately. This is not even a joke. He cited a Holocaust denier on history of the Holocaust. I'm like,
That's funny because he opens the Greatest Show on Earth with an analogy. He says, "Imagine trying to defend the existence of the Roman Empire to your history class." So that's kind of funny.
yeah, that's
It's
sort of funny.
similar to that fact.
But his book is both of those books are fantastic. I'd recommend pretty much all of his biology works. They're all very. His prose is wonderful.
And Selfish Gene.
Selfish Gene, that's a classic. Yeah.
I remember there some discussion or some debate over Selfish Gene. Like
Yes, the book itself is quite dated by this point. It was written in 1976.
fair.
What Dawkins is advocating for in The Selfish Gene is the gene-centric view of life. The kind of weird thing. So basically, it's like, okay, you have your genes, and they're sequestered away from the environment, and you have mutations, and genes or organisms are competing against other organisms, genes against other genes. But it's not just the gene. It's not a single gene that is passed along. It's all the genes get passed along in each generation, and so it's dated. At the time, it was a good summation of Neo-Darwinian thought, but by this point, it's as good as like a historical reference point if you want to just know the history of kind of this line of thought. But I wouldn't suggest reading it as this is how evolution works.
It's sort of like how reading Charles Darwin's book. If you read Charles Darwin's book and assume that's just the modern understanding of evolution, no.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, Origin of Species and Descent of Man, as well as I haven't read his other works, but yeah, those are good books. But heck, they were written in the late 1800s. We have moved light years beyond what he understood back then. I mean, remember, he had no concept of DNA.
No, Origin of Species was written a year before the Civil War kicked off.
Yep, 1859. So, it's a good book if you just want a historical reference point. If you want to see what he thought of of evolutionary theory, and it's fascinating to get a view into his, or to get kind of a window into his view of things, because it's very different from how modern researchers look at evolutionary theory. It's amazing to see kind of the ideas he was grappling with, in essence, on his own. He didn't have a whole slew of researchers working on this for him. It was him. You had him, and you had Alfred Russel Wallace on the other side of the world, and they kind of came out with their ideas at the same time, but they were each kind of on their own, and that's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, another point, like, he also, I haven't gotten a chance to read it, but I heard he did go into Aristotle in some of the, I know he does some philosophy in his books as well.
No, not from what I remember in Origin, but he probably did write some bit about it. He's very hopeful in Origin of Species about like future prospects in evolutionary theory, like
Yeah.
And I Am Raku says, to add on to that too, aren't there multiple different cultures disconnected from the Near East that have flood myths, kind of like chaos camp myths? Yes, there are.
Yeah, there's plenty of them. Like, I mean, it makes sense. Like, if there was a big flood, like not a worldwide flood, I mean, to define worldwide, but if there was a huge flood, of course, many different places would record it.
Yeah. Utopia Buster says, no, I just don't like the term creationist. And selfish gene is pseudoscience.
I wouldn't agree.
I'm sorry, say that again.
He says, I just don't like the term creationist. And selfish gene is pseudoscience.
Okay, whatever.
That's lovely.
Yeah.
All right, so.
And he says that he adds on that it speculates that cultural and societal influences can be genetically inherited. Dawkins tried to explain the evolution of religiosity.
I mean, in some respects, I will not be really surprised, or I wouldn't be surprised if it turned out that there's some genetic aspect to religiosity. I really wouldn't be surprised by that. Sorry?
I think they're talking about, they're referring to memes.
Oh yeah, I mean, Dawkins did come up with the idea of memes in the selfish gene, which is kind of hilarious in and of itself. But yeah, the idea that thoughts are kind of like they're kind of like genes in that they get mutated, they get passed along, and mutated and passed along, and so it's a nice little analogy, or it's an interesting little analogy for it. Not perfect, but still.
Well, just think about it in this way. Christians have the Renaissance and all the art, and just have memes.
Yeah.
We have the modern Renaissance. Yeah, that's yeah. I remember I saw an interview where like someone asked Richard Dawkins to explain like internet memes, and he thought all memes were like the like the picture against the black background and it has like the words at the bottom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was the way he described it, and I was like, wow. Does he ever get on the internet?
Not really.
And now he's on the internet too much.
You got to remember he's old as hell.
Oh yeah, that's true. He's in his late 70s, so.
I mean, he's so old that he's almost as old as some of the fossils that he digs up.
Savage.
He's a has-been who made a comeback and is a has-been again, who's trying to be relevant again by writing an atheist for kids book.
I love his biology work is just astounding.
But everything else is just terrible.
Well, what was funny is like he wrote a children's book on atheism to tell children what atheism is. It's just 100 blank pages.
That would be hilarious. He did. I do remember. He's been talking about writing that book for years. So I guess he finally just got on it. But I
Yeah.
remember I used to watch interviews of him on YouTube, and yeah, I remember he mentioned that he wants to write that book.
Like,
So,
why? Why do you want to write a book? Like,
yeah,
Well,
I think it'd be better for him to write a book teaching evolution to young kids, like what
yeah,
Jonathan Sweet
evolution.
did with Grandmother Fish.
Yeah,
Grandmother Fish was fantastic.
Like, but that's just necessary. But why atheism to kids though? That just doesn't.
well, I mean, it would be pretty easy to teach it. Just like I said,
Well, yeah,
just
teach it, but not evangelize it.
no. I'm just saying, like you just have a book that says what atheism is, and it's just 100 blank pages.
Yeah, it's just like a belief.
That's it's a fill in your own book.
Hmm.
I mean, but yeah,
But yeah, I would rather he write a book about teaching evolution to kids. But
yeah. I think
All right, we should
oh
be
well, we
wrapping
can
up
dream, I
soon.
guess.
Yeah, we should be wrapping
Yeah.
up soon. You got any closing thoughts?
like Jack.
Check out my channel. Haha. I do stuff and things over there.
Check out Jackson Wheat's channel. Subscribe to him.
And just remember, this is
But
brass saying goodbye and get wise. I can show my shit too.
See you tomorrow or the next day, where we'll be interviewing Joel Emman Anderson. Good night, everybody.